will get started. I am Brenda Brown Dillard. I am president of Alabama State University Board of Trustees, and I'm also the strategic manager of MSI STEM Research and Development Consortium. So we're going to introduce ourselves and say a little something about who we are and what we do. I started my career leaving Alabama State with the United States General Accounting Office, then went to the Tennessee Valley Authority. It's funny because it was at that office that the Inspector General told me that he didn't have enough African Americans. And I said, give me 1 second. And I made a phone call to my dean back at Alabama State University and went on campus and hired 3 people right off the bat who are now retiring from the Tennessee Valley Authority. I left there to go work in the nuclear field. Started off as the VP of Internal Audit. I then decided that I wanted to go to DC to see what was going on there. So I said I'd like to be the liaison. My president at the time said to me, but you don't have a second degree. I didn't think at the time I'd need a second degree to talk to congressmen and talk about what we were doing back at the nuclear facility, but I did. I went to a PWI, the University of Tennessee, and got a second degree. And I then went to DC to do the nuclear work, but I decided that I need to learn a whole lot about nuclear weapons, how we make them, so I did. I went to all of our national labs. I learned how we design our weapon. I then went to our production facilities. I learned how we manufacture and produce our weapons, and I became the United States, the United Kingdom liaison, where I worked with the British government on how we make our weapons. Retired from there, and now I work with the Minority Consortium, doing what I love, and that's to help HBCUs get not grants, but government contracts.
Wow, how do I follow that? It's just my honor to be here with you today, Trustee Dillard. What a brilliant woman, and just to have some moments with you this morning before breakfast was absolutely delightful, so thank you. I want to thank my colleague, Rosalind Artist, Dr. Artist, another brilliant woman who is blazing a trail in her own right, and then of course, our HBCU champion, Mr. George. Thank you for this opportunity. My colleague who's on the panel with us, Dr. Gale, and to all of you, good morning, and I'm excited to be here with you to talk about some of the issues that we will talk about. But a little bit about me. I'm Carmen J. Walters, a daughter of 2 African-American folks who raised 13 children right here in New Orleans without being on welfare. And that is unheard of. So I owe everything that I have and I do to my parents. I never cease to mention Thomas and Ophelia because I stand on their shoulder. But more importantly, I stand on the shoulder of a young woman named Charlotte, who was a slave, and she was my descendant. And Charlotte was married at 12 and a slave at 12. And when I think about challenges I face in my role as the HBCU president, I'm reminded of the struggle of Charlotte, and then my work becomes easy. And so I came from very large community colleges, and here in Louisiana, we have Delgado Community College. Many of you may have heard of that institution. And then I was at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, another college in Mississippi. Working in a community college, as some of you have come from that role, that is the hardest to serve population of people. And I was blessed to do exceptionally well in those roles, and so I was nominated to the presidency for Jackson State. I was nominated for Alcorn, and I was was nominated for Tougaloo, and Tougaloo's door opened, and I saw that as my mission. Tougaloo is 153 years old. It's a former slave plantation, and so more than 75 slaves walked on our campus at any given time in the 1800s. The plantation home that the slave owner built is still there. It's 160 years old. Problem number one, how do you keep it up? All of my buildings are over 80 years old, and so they're all historic, and it's hard for me to say, let's tear them down. So we are excited to be here today to basically talk on the topic, but I just want to give you a little bit about Tougaloo College and our mission around social justice and academic rigor. And so we have Tougaloo is Choctaw, Native American, for two streams that converge, academic rigor and social justice. And that's what we teach at our institutions, and mainly we are making doctors and lawyers. I mentioned yesterday that 44% of the African American doctors in the state of Mississippi graduated from Tougaloo College, and 34% of the lawyers and educators. But I did not say that the number of blacks in Mississippi, there are only 38% of Mississippi is African American. And so when you think about the data that we are providing, I agree with Dr. Michael Lomax when he said HBCUs are punching above our weight. And so I'll turn it over to our colleague to introduce herself, Gail.
First of all, I'm just pleased to be able to be here, and sorry I wasn't able to be there in person. I just started my role as the 11th president of Spelman College about 3 months ago, and as people can imagine, in my first few months of my presidency, it is definitely drinking from a fire hose. So I wish I could be there with you all personally, but it's wonderful just to be part of this panel. And I came into this role perhaps with a non-traditional background. This is my first role in higher education. I am a physician by training, trained as a pediatrician, but very soon migrated into public health because I really wanted to think about how I could have an impact through the lens of health, but at a population level as opposed to an individual level. And so, when you're a practicing physician, your patient is an individual. When you are a public health physician, your patient is a community, a nation, and sometimes even the world. So I went into medicine because I wanted to be able to have a way of having a tangible impact, particularly on issues that impacted the Black community and issues of inequity and how do we address those. And so, my career has gone from individual health to public health to then focusing on global health, particularly again looking at the inequities that we know exist in health around the world for people in Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world that are disproportionately impacted by poor health as well as poor economic outcomes and poverty. 20 years at the Centers for Disease Control, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then went into looking at the issues of global poverty and headed CARE, the International Humanitarian Poverty Fighting Organization here in Atlanta, and did that, and then migrated into doing more at the local level in terms of economic inequities and wealth inequality. And for me, the issues of health and wealth are so intertwined, and so I looked at the inequities in health, realizing how much of those are really driven by the social and economic inequities that we see in this country and around the world. My last job before coming here was in Chicago, heading the Community Foundation in Chicago, where we put together a strategy to focus on closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap. How can we make sure that Black and Latinx populations that were disproportionately impacted by lack of opportunity, economic opportunity, lack of health access, and how could we have an impact on those populations? So for me, coming to Spelman, an HBCU that has a history of social mobility, and as my colleague Carmen mentioned, HBCUs have always punched above their weight in terms of what we produce and how we prepare the next leaders, Black leaders, for our country. I felt that it's part of my commitment to equity and social justice, coming to a school that has always been a beacon for opportunity, social justice, and the empowerment of women. That felt to me like a place where I could make a difference and really give back to the next generation of change leaders who, hopefully we can help to shape their lives so that they can be around to solve today's problems and tomorrow's problems, and we prepare them well to do that. So I'm just pleased to be part of this panel and pleased to be working in the arena of higher education, particularly at an HBCU.
Thank you. And I feel fortunate to be in the presence of such powerful women. And I like to say about Dr. Artis, I don't know if she's still here, but she celebrates women.
Yes.
I appreciate that. We have to celebrate each other. So we'll just jump right into our first question. What can be done to right-size and sustain HBCUs? And Dr. Walters, if you would kick that off, that would be great.
Well, thank you so much. As I read these questions, all of you, have so many answers already in your heads about your own institutions, whether you're serving on the board or whether you're serving as the chief of staff. But I think I'd like to start, and since I'm here with you, Trustee Dillard, I'd like to start with the board. I have a long list in my iPad of things that we could do to sustain, but I'd like to start with the board. And the reason, and then let me clarify, I'm going to be speaking from a private institution perspective, because I don't run a state institution. I graduated from 2 HBCUs, and I understand some of the dynamics, but I've never served as the chief officer. So I'm going to be talking about private institutions. And our private institutions, the boards are huge. There are 23 to 30 people. The bylaws speak to that. And the way we work with finding board members are basically through research and relationships. And but some of the challenges on the private side is that our boards are very, very heavily laden with alums. So it's very challenging to move the institution forward, and they have vision. Alex and I were talking about that last night, how sometimes people want the institution to remain as when they were there in the 80s and 90s. So they can't understand that they can't handle that innovation. But I think that's one area to start. And I'll just say this, I'm on the board, and Rosalind is on this board. I'm engaged with the Council of Independent Colleges. And so I have a colleague on the East Coast who has a board with 28 people. 13 of those people gave him $1 million this year. So we don't have those kinds of board members. And so if we could start there with getting the board members that have vision, are running these Fortune 500 companies, and engage them. So I'm putting out a plea, Mr. Dorch, if you could help me connect to some of those people, right? So I think let's start there. And then innovation from our faculty, being engaged in research, we have to ramp that up to be more sustainable. And then engagement from our alumni who are being blessed from these institutions. So I just have a plethora of things. So I have intellectual innovation, we need that. We need intellectual diversity, making sure our faculty are coming from all over the world to expose our students to other ideas. Our endowments need to be increased. We need to double the Pell. Last year was the 50th year of Pell. And 50 years ago when Pell started, you could pay for 75% of the state school's tuition. Today, it's about 13%. All of those things, I think, can help sustain historically Black colleges and universities.
Thank you. Dr. Gale, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, thank you. And I would just say ditto to many of the things that my colleague, Dr. Walton, said need to happen. And I guess I would say, it all begins with resources. At the end of the day, we know that we make up our budgets, our ability to provide financial aid to students, et cetera, in a very piecemeal way. And we're all able to deliver the things that we deliver because we get a lot of short-term help. And I think that's essential. And the scholarships that we get from different corporations and scholarship support from individuals, all of those things make a big difference. But at the end of the day, we don't have the kind of endowments that allow us to project into the future and really allow us to think strategically about where do we put our resources. It becomes very difficult because you have a budget that is essentially made up of multiple many earmarked pots of funds, which always puts you in a difficult position because you are primarily focusing on what a individual source of revenue may be. So, first and foremost, we all have to be able to figure out ways to increase our endowments so that we keep the great faculty in place who then deliver for our students. And, I have been really impressed since coming here to Spelman how critical that piece is around faculty support, because we have faculty who come labor of love. They are here because they absolutely believe in the mission. But, they have practical realities. And as more and more PWIs are appreciating the importance of diversity, faculty, and student diversity, they're able to provide things that we just cannot. And everyone has to be practical, think about their career, think about their family. So, I think it all starts with us being able to have the kind of resources that allow us to keep the best faculty, make our education as affordable as possible, and then be able to supply financial support to students who need it. And we are always, again, compared to our predominant white institutions, we are always going to have a larger proportion of students who need financial aid. So all of it is predicated on being able to have the kind of resources that allow us to think long term. It also means that we all need to think about how do we maintain our own level of excellence and distinctiveness so that we continue to be a good product for people to invest in. So it's all part of the cycle of how we make sure that we stay relevant, that if we're relevant, we are able to attract the resources, and if we're able to attract the resources, we can continue to maintain that excellence at the teaching level and continue to recruit excellent students as well.
And you're so correct with resources. When we think about, and we were talking earlier about a quarterback coach at a neighboring college at Auburn University making more than some of our top presidents. When you try to Google salaries of HBCU presidents, what I found made me want to cry is that 4 PWI presidents make more than 60% of all of our HBCU presidents. That's very sad. And so our resources is definitely something that we have to continue to work on to sustain our HBCUs. Next, what are some of the out-of-the-box ideas that challenge the fundamental tenets of the higher education model for women leaders?
Ooh, out-of-the-box ideas. I tell you, every day I'm just looking for growth opportunities and taking risk. And so know, when you are a female in a role that's been dominated by men, you start to use men as role models, but then when you go to men to say, well, I wouldn't do it like that, I would do this, that, or the other, there's a challenge there because most of our board chairs are men. And so when you go to a man with a new idea, a new way of thinking, most times for me, I have experienced pushback. And so the out-of-the-box idea that I had was to change the makeup and the structure of my institution to say, you know, I really don't need vice presidents for all of these areas. You know, let's kind of lessen that and spread this out and break this up and get rid of some of this. It's just too hierarchical. And I received a lot of pushback from that. We had 7 vice presidents and I went down to 4. And the board was thinking, you're going to be mired in a lot of work. But I was able to show them that there was just not a lot of work being done. There was a lot of titles. And so that was an out-of-the-box idea. You come in saying to vice presidents, you don't have to go home, but you won't be doing this.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Gale, what are your out-of-the-box ideas?
Well, I'm not sure that I have any, out-of-the-box ideas yet. I think that for us at Spelman, because we are a school that is dedicated to the education of women of African descent, one of the most important ways to demonstrate women leadership is to see it. And people are able to see that every day. We're able to see not only among our students who are doing incredible out-of-the-box things. I just went to a presentation the other day and, developing a new source of energy to look at the energy efficient rocket, things like that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But, here we see the whole spectrum of young Black women who, for them, they aren't seeing limits. And that's part of what I think our HBCUs are able to take young people who often come from, our society imposed as limits and show them that there are no limits and we believe in them. And so I think, the best, it's not necessarily out of the box, but how do we continue to expose young women to opportunities so that they don't see that they are limited by their race or by their gender, and continue to put them in experiences where they are exposed to mentors and people who are achieving great things. And so, that's not necessarily out of the box, but I think continuing to find ways to expose young women as well as, our young men to things that they may not have thought were possible for them, and making it clear that, the sky really is the limit. It takes putting in the time, putting in the effort. But, as they say, you can't be what you don't see. So we've got to make sure that we provide those examples to our young people.
Very good. One of the things to follow up on what you're talking about is in the nuclear field, at the labs, at the production facilities. First of all, there are not a whole lot of African Americans, and there are definitely not a whole lot of women. When I went to DC to work with the National Nuclear Security Administration, I went to a nuclear deterrence summit, and I bet there were 3 African Americans in this huge conference room, right? These are our facilities all over the world. So I started then asking, how do we get more women? How do we get more African Americans in the nuclear weapons field? Don't think that it's so hard. A lot of people don't even know we're still making nuclear weapons, right? And so finally, Next year, I will be moderating the first conference ever that they ever had in the history of the NNSA, talking about diversity and how we diverse and get HBCUs in this field. And so we have to continue to provide opportunities for our young people so that they can get in the door and do these opportunities. So how do you push for systemic change around ideas that are new or not popular? And I'll start with you, Dr. Gale, on this one.
Well, I think, first of all, it starts with having a good idea. And I think, really looking, and it kind of related to the first question of sustainability, how do we really think about what are the levers of change that will create long-term systems change, as you said? I think we recognize that we're all dealing with systems that have held people of color, Black people specifically, behind and have reduced opportunity. And I think that, as HBCUs, we have a real opportunity to use our holy pulpit to talk about some of the systemic barriers that have existed and how can we address these. And so I think, it means that those of us who have positions like these should also be thinking about the public policy arena. How do we not only think about what's good for us and our campuses, but what's really good, what will really serve the greater good? How can we have an impact that allows us to tear down some of the barriers that have existed? And to do that across the board. How do we look at the business sector? How do we look at government? How do we look at nonprofit? What are the areas where we want to be able to have full access to the opportunities? And how do we continue to shape our voices to advocate for that? So I think it means we have a responsibility to be part of the public policy debate. And when there's legislation that's going through that we know would have an impact on the good of our communities overall, are we there? Are we using our voices? Are we talking about, how we can make a difference? And one very basic thing is, are we turning out to vote next week to make sure that we have elected officials who are going to think about the things that will make a big difference for us in our community? So I'm a strong believer that we should use our voice as loudly as possible to push for those issues that will have long-term systemic change.
Thank you. Dr. Walters.
I agree wholeheartedly with my colleague, and I'm going to come out of the 30-foot level and go down to maybe 10 feet, thinking about our own HBCUs in our communities. We are the pillars of our community, so how do we drive change in our community at the local levels? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. What role are we playing from our president's suite to the governor's suite? And how do we get our community galvanized around change? And I become very tactical, so I'm a tactician more, and I'm looking for ways to implement change all the time. So we're educating students about being the change that they want to see. And I love your statements that you're sharing, being engaged in the elections, but being engaged in change just even on the campus. What role can we play? Are we a polling place? Can we become a polling place? When we're pushing for change, can we ask for some of our students to be in some of the meetings that we are all not invited to, where we can help discuss the ingredients in the pie? How are we engaging around economic development in our own communities? As an HBCU that is about social change for us, I am on a lot of boards that normally a Black person wouldn't even want to be on. But I say yes because I need to know what they're doing across town. How is it going to affect me? And how can I jump on that wave of change, career path for our students? So I think change has to be systemic. but we have to have patience in change because people don't handle change well. There has to be trust in change. So when I'm talking to organizations about how do I get more students to do internships and no one looks like us, I have to have patience when they are saying, well, we've tried that and it didn't work. So then now let's delve into that to see why didn't that work? How can I help make it work? And so change is not easy, but it's very, very important. And I think the systemic ability of all of us coming together collectively, like I am in the Mississippi Association of Independent Colleges. We have several HBCUs in my state. We have never had one meeting, all of the HBCU presidents together. Never. Just come sit down and say, what are the challenges? We're too busy listening to the community saying that we're competing against each other, when really we're not. We're really not. Jackson State is 8 miles, 7 miles from me. I am not competing with Jackson State. I'm competing with some of the PWIs who are coming in trying to collect our students so they make sure they have a diverse population. So change is difficult, but you gotta be all in around change. And we have to sit there and collaborate and work through the challenges at the local level so that we can really be the change that people want to see. That's just my thoughts on that.
Absolutely, and everyone has to be willing to make that change. I know at Alabama State, we have a visionary president, Dr. Ross, and so we started looking at our curriculum.
Yes.
As Stephen B. pointed out yesterday, we got to look at what industry uses and what's current. And we started an MBA program. We're pleased to say we just kicked off the first year of that. We looked at everything that wasn't relevant in our curriculum and we changed it. And so that took not only the board, the president, the faculty. Imagine you're teaching classes in something that's no longer relevant. You have to be willing to change to do something new.
Absolutely.
So it requires everyone to be on board to make those kind of changes. Okay, let's talk about some proposals. This is saying grant proposal. I want to talk about contracts too. But when submitting a grant proposal for funding, what educational outcomes do you look for?
Well, first of all, if you're going to write a grant and you get the grant, you got to do what you said you were going to do. And you have to report on what you were doing or you won't get the money anymore. I was a grant writer for many years and it's actually a very satisfying role for me to be able to pull a proposal together, see it to the end, and then get it funded. One of the things we're looking at, so let me go back to say, at Tougaloo College, for students to graduate, they have to have 124 credits. That's one thing. A lot of schools have 120. They have to do community service, and they have to do internships. But they have to write a thesis to graduate. They select a topic in their junior year, and then they write the topic and defend it in their senior year, because 75% of them are going on to four-year schools. So research is very important to Tougaloo. Grant writing is even more important because our budget is so small. So at a small college with 700 kids, we are averaging $30 million a year in grants, and we're trying to grow that. And we're trying to delve into contracts, and you and I talked about that. So what's important about grant writing and looking for writing your program, the outcomes we're looking for is for faculty to be developed, to solve problems around our community, to make sure that our students are engaged in the research, to have outcomes of not only fiscal support, but outcomes and resources, but outcomes that can change the way we think about the work that we're doing. We are part of a big study in Mississippi, the Jackson Heart Study. And so the purpose of that grant is to solve the crisis, the health crisis around heart conditions in the state of Mississippi. The state of Mississippi is #1 on everything, from being overweight, don't look at me. And then for being undereducated, for being the sickest, dying at an early age. And so we have the delta, which is the middle part of the state. If you remove the delta and its data from the state of Mississippi, Mississippi would be in the top 5 in many areas. It's that one area that has no corporations. There are people there still picking cotton with a cotton gin. So we are looking for results to change and move the state. So we got the Jackson Heart Study. Another study we have is around women dying from having babies, the mortality rate in Mississippi, and the children dying at childbirth. Those rates are very high. So we're doing research around that, and we're looking to move the needle around health disparities in the state of Mississippi. So those are some of the outcomes that we're looking at.
Thank you. I have one final question. I'll let you go first, Dr. Gale. What has been the most significant barrier in your career as a woman?
I guess I would say, people's perceptions about, what a woman can or should do. And I think as we start to change perceptions, we also tear down a lot of barriers. And, it's why I think having women who are part of your network, women who are mentors, women who have done things in arenas that have opened up the arena is so important, because I think being able to not be your own barrier, because oftentimes we stand in our own ways because we don't believe that we can accomplish many of the things we do. So I think having other strong women around us and continuing to support each other as we look at tearing down some of these barriers and going places that no one has ever seen before or gone before.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Dr. Gale and give an example of what she just said. Here in Louisiana, LSU has its own board, Southern University has its own board, so forth and so on, and then there's a board of regents. Well, in Mississippi, for the higher ed state system, there's just one board. There's a person who became the president of that board. And he was doing the same work I was doing at the community college level, but he became the president of that board. So when I was nominated to Jackson State's position, all of the resumes went to him, even though there was a search firm. And he called me and said, I want to talk with you. And I said, okay. And he looked at my resume and he said, your resume is quite impressive. And I thought, okay, good. And he said, but as I sit here thinking about this, with you coming from large community colleges, I don't think you can make the leap to be a university president. And I sat there thinking, not only did you make the leap, you made a bounding jump from being the same role I am in a community college all the way to the chair of the president of the system of all IHL. And so to hear him tell me that was, fuel for me to say, okay, you think that this is not something I can do, I certainly will do it. And so perception of people is really the dominating factor to me of what women can do. Clearly he wasn't saying, he said from a community college, but he couldn't have meant that because we had the same role, had been to many meetings together. I knew him very well. So I think literally what he was saying is, as a female, I can't see you leading Jackson State because they had just removed a female. And the other thing I think is a barrier for women particularly is we can't make a mistake. There are some male presidents who have made huge mistakes and end up being a president in the next 6 months. But there are female presidents who have made errors, and maybe not even an error, it's something, a disagreement with his or her board, and they never get back into the role. So as a female, we're walking around on high heels, on eggs, because we can't make a mistake. My husband died once I was in this role for 3 months. So now I'm a single woman as a president, which is a whole nother ballgame, because I can't have a scandal. So, you know, I'm sitting there talking to Alex last night, and I'm like, look, we're gonna go in this big old place where everybody can see us sitting here, because I can't have a scandal. You know, so I know men aren't sitting around thinking about that, but women are. And so those are barriers to success for us, because I can't just go out there and say, I'm going to play a round of golf with Mr. Dorch. I got to be able to say, can my chief of staff come and hang out with me? I need a chaperone. Those kinds of things are still an issue, and then I'm a president in a southern state. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I know you guys aren't thinking about that.
Sometimes it's just the barrier is just being a woman.
It's just
right?
being a woman.
It's just being a woman. We can't change who we are. We have to negotiate our salary, just like the men do.
Oh, don't talk about salary.
we have to
Most
say I want
male
a bonus.
presidents, if you pull the data, the average male president is making more than the female president. I just thought I'd share that too.
Okay, well, thank you ladies so much for this wonderful question. Now we have time for any question the audience may have for either one of us.
I'm Camille Branch-Selby. I work for Xerox, and then we had our CEO here yesterday. Fantastic, I thought. But one of the things that I'm also the president of the National Black Employees Association, which is the Black Employee Resource Group at Xerox. And we had our national conference just a couple of weeks ago. In fact, Mr. George came and spoke. He was amazing. But one of the other speakers was the Chief Marketing Officer for UPS. And one of the things he said was that he is concerned about our community from a perspective of being risk averse. And that a lot of our students are choosing to go into lower paid fields where it's more stable and more comfortable, right? It's important, obviously, that we have teachers and social workers and other types of roles like that, but I'm still the only one in the room. And I'm a vice president of sales, and it's just me. And I've got sales roles in places like Alabama, where I got just one black guy there. So how do we open the minds of our students to do something different? I mean, I think they're being held back by fear. How do we get them to move beyond the misperception of stability that doesn't exist? To go out and do things and earn incomes that enable them to reinvest back into the HBCUs and also change the dynamic, at least in corporate America, so I can stop sitting and work by myself.
Yeah, and I unfortunately, because I am virtual and my calendar is full, I'm going to have to hop off afterwards. So, I'm just, first of all, thank you for the question. I do think that, I don't know if it was risk aversion or, just not having been exposed as broadly to some of the opportunities. And I do think because we often tend to be very mission driven in what we want to do, and we want to do things that help our community. I think we need to also show young people how, as you said, taking a corporate career where you might have greater financial reward then allows you to be a contributor to your community in a different way. And so I think, figuring out how we marry our students' aspirations to give back and to, be good citizens within our community is not in any way opposed to going out and taking careers that, we haven't been in before, and all the careers that provide for more economic opportunity. We're starting here with Morehouse College, a center for Black entrepreneurship, and we're really excited about it. Not just because I think entrepreneurship is a way that people make new businesses, etc., but because I think that entrepreneurial spirit and the spirit of innovation should be something that everyone gets, regardless of what they're thinking about in terms of their career. How do we give young people the sense of venturing out beyond their boundaries, taking on new risks, taking on new opportunities? And so I think it's getting that mindset that allows us to realize, we can take these things on and that we can do it in a way that gives back to our communities. And with that, I'm going to say bye. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Thank
you. I'm going to agree with Dr. Gale and say too that it is an exposure, and it's Carmel, right? Yes, Carmel. We are, my former president, Dr. Beverly Wade Hogan, such a gracious woman, started something, changed our curriculum to say, from the summer of your freshman year, you will have internships. So our freshmen in the summer have to go spend 2 weeks somewhere as an intern. And then every year, those internships have to be longer and longer because we want that exposure. And we are saying to students, an internship will help you understand that you either want to do this, or you certainly hate it and never want to do it, or you find something new to do. And we're looking at internships from every sector. No internship is too big or too small. And we're also asking for paid internships because of the hardship of our students having to travel to be there, housing, and things like that. And so the internship is one way to expose students to these fields and helping them. And what we say to a student, when you're getting ready to do the research, you just can't go, oh, I'm going to work at Xerox and be a this. Well, what do you know about that role? Do a little research. So they have to do a summary, a one-page summary to understand what they're getting into, and they get grades for their internships. But I think the exposure, I'm sitting here thinking about this nuclear stuff, right? How do I expose my students to that? And I think all of you can help us, all the corporations can help us as we reach out for paid internships for summer. And also during the school year, some of our students will take a semester and work at a company in the spring and then come back in the fall because they are earning college credit. The highest time of your sales, you might say, look, we are hopping in December. So then maybe we need to have students with you in December so they can get that experience. We are open to all of those things, and I know every president in here is open to doing that.
And then we, as alumni, we have to take risks. So we have to insist that we get some other people in the company that look like us. I remember taking a job at Y12 nuclear facility, and probably a year after I'd taken the job, I asked for all the new people in the room to stand up. There were about 50 African Americans who stood up. Now, that was 10 years ago, right? That they had an opportunity. You gotta get in the door to move up. But they had an opportunity, and now some of those employees are managers. They also, like I did, got my master's degree paid for. So opportunities is there, but we as alumni have to take some risks and bring some other people. Keep reaching down and bringing them up so they can trail the same road that we trailed. Any other questions? If not, thank you so much. Again, thanks to Tommy, thanks to Dr. Artis for allowing us to be part of this summit. We appreciate it, and thank you for listening.